Good evening. Welcome to the Southbridge Town Council Special Town Council meeting of Tuesday, July 7th, 2020 at 5 p.m. here in the council chambers. As we call the meeting to order pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place. This special town council meeting is being conducted via in-person as well as remote participation. Reminder that persons who would like to view this meeting while in progress may do so by watching Southbridge Cable Access Channel 192 or by the remote information noted below. We will post a record of this meeting on the town's website at www.ci.southbridge.ma.us as soon as we are able to. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mary will be scribing the minutes based on the video of this meeting because she wasn't able to be here, but I will call the roll. If I don't do it precisely alphabetically, I apologize. But Councilor Adams?
Present.
Councilor Dow? Present. Councilor Catrona?
Present.
Councilor Daniel?
Present.
Councilor Ryan?
Present.
Councilor Marchetti?
Present.
Councilor Lazo?
Present.
Councilor Steves?
Present.
And Chairman Jovin's present, so all members present. Good evening. Tonight we're here for the interviews for the finalists for the Town Manager as recommended by the Town Manager Search Committee on June 29, 2020. Welcome to the new members of the Town Council. Vice Chairman Daniel briefed you last night on the finalist. Tonight we're joined by our search consultant, Bernie Lynch from
Community
Paradigm. I was going to mix that up, Paradigm Community, who assisted us in the search. That was a great search process. He's going to be here to introduce the three candidates as we go forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Bernie. Bernie?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just very briefly, I know that you were briefed, we briefed you on this, or some of you, most of you on this when we spoke last week when we introduced the candidates themselves, the names, and I know that Mr. Daniel, Councilor Daniels, I'm sure gave you a rundown last night as well. I think the town did very well in terms of the number of candidates that you had. We had a good, strong field, as I was describing to one of the councilors before the meeting. It's a very competitive time right now in the marketplace for managers. Over half of the managers, or roughly half of the managers in the state have turned over within the last 4 years, 4 or 5 years as a result of retirements primarily. So there's really, in terms of economics, there's many buyers chasing too few goods. So it makes for a very competitive market, but the town did very well in terms of its candidates. The screening committee that you had did an outstanding job of drilling down into each one of the candidates, asking the tough questions, and I think you have three very strong candidates tonight. And the first candidate that I will introduce to you is Michael McCall, the Assistant Town Manager in the town of Chelmsford. So I'd ask Michael to come up and let you proceed with your questions. And I'll be here all evening, and I'll be available on Thursday when you have your follow-up meeting to address any questions that you may have.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the council.
Good evening, Michael, and welcome to the town of Southbridge, and thank you for your interest in Southbridge. Strange times with the COVID-19, we're all spread out, no handshakes and all that, so it's a little different types of interviews. So every council has an opportunity to ask a question. Get through the next hour or so with as much information as you can provide to the council. So again, we'd like to thank you for your interest in the town of Southbridge. So first off, I guess you want just to briefly explain what circumstances led you to look for this new position and how your qualifications and experience match up with the challenges and opportunities which we detailed in the position statement.
Thank you, great question. So I'm a late convert in some regards to the administrative field in municipal government, but not exactly. I started out as a town meeting representative. I served 3 years on our town's finance committee and then 9 years as a member of our Board of Selectmen in a town of 35,000 people. I was a professional project manager for the high-tech industry and I have been a lifelong learner, so I pursued a master's degree in engineering, computer science specifically. And while I was a project manager, I had the opportunity to go to law school for my company to help in the intellectual property field. My project management experience led me to work in Europe. I led a transatlantic project out of Switzerland where I had to become fluent in German to conduct the project. When I came back, I started working as an attorney for the high-tech industry. I didn't want to take another transfer to the West Coast, so I followed my second love, which I became a municipal attorney. In an effort to become a city solicitor, I wound up taking a job as a prosecutor to get trial experience. I worked for some small communities in New Hampshire, southern New Hampshire specifically, and I got involved working with the police chiefs, fire chiefs, the administration, the town administrators, and at one point I was invited to interview as a town administrator in southern New Hampshire. At that point I realized that this was my career path. I then took a job as an assistant town manager, unfortunately in my home community. I followed up on that by getting a graduate certificate through the MMA, the Mass Municipal Association, in partnership with Suffolk University. I graduated with distinction in that program. I had a 4.0 cum. I've since started a master's in public administration with Suffolk. I'm 60% of the way done through the curriculum, and I have a 4.0. The reason why I'm looking at this time in my career, it is a good time for someone like myself. There are opportunities out there. There are challenges out there. I've always been a problem solver and someone who takes on challenges in my career. I didn't shy away from moving several times, taking on big responsibility in those companies. I understand that COVID-19 presents an awful lot of challenges to communities much like Southbridge and my home community is Chelmsford, but I feel I'm one of these people that likes to rise to the occasion during these times. I sat on the committee with the town manager to help address the budget shortfall and the projections and revenue loss. So when I looked around, I realized that I have a skill set and I have a willingness to learn, and I'm looking for someone who will match that in terms of taking a challenge and taking me on, and that I know that I have high expectations for myself and everything that I do, and that I would meet your expectations and your goals and become your next town manager.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to Councilor Lazo. Councilor Lazo?
Mike, describe your understanding of the role of the town manager within the town of Southbridge and your anticipated relationship with the town council, and describe the process you envision for working with the town council and its goals and objectives.
Okay. Thank you. The town council form of government is slightly different than what I've experienced over the years. I've dealt with open town meeting, representative town meeting. In our charter, we have a strong town manager and a 5-member board of selectmen. But regardless of where you go, the key to getting things done is communication. I constantly rely on email and my cell phone to stay in contact with the manager, all the department heads I work with, but above all, we correspond on a regular basis throughout the day with our board of selectmen, letting them know what's going on in the town, if there's a crisis or something that they need to know about. I would conduct myself the same way here in Southbridge. I understand that you're the executive body. It's not like the town meeting that I have to go to and present once a year and convince 162 people. I'm working with this council every other week at a meeting or every week at the meeting, so the communication is going to be key. And I'm going to have to form relationships with each and every one of you and have that open door policy that I currently have in the town of Chelmsford. People feel comfortable calling me, whether I've known them for 1 year or my entire life growing up in that town, and they come in to my office, whether it's about trash pickup, tax bills, or economic development. And so the open door policy and the direct lines of communication is the way I've operated, and that's the way I would intend to operate with you, Councilor Laszlo.
Thank you.
Follow-up? Also. Councilor Adams?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you.
My question's on leadership and management. As a town manager, your leadership and management skills will most likely be challenged in a wide range of areas, such as dealing with natural and/or health emergencies, personnel and personality differences, both internally and externally, cultural diversity, economic and infrastructure matters that are specific to our town here, and other variety of other topics. Based on your experience and in a general answer, How do you approach these variety of issues, both as a leader and as a manager?
Okay. I've always viewed myself as a collaborative leader. I work well by gathering people into my office and sharing of ideas. My background, if you've seen my resume, is takes some interesting twists and turns, but that has afforded me the opportunity to learn to work with people from all different sectors of life. Being a municipal or district court prosecutor, I work with people from every corner of the community, all different socioeconomic backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds. And I've learned that at the end of the day, if you can treat people with compassion and be open and honest with them, you can get a lot of things done that way. In terms of leadership, again, I like to build a team, but when the time comes, I'm not afraid to take charge and give direction. Currently in my role, I oftentimes find myself dealing with some very difficult challenges with regard to employment. I had to take leadership role in a lot of the union negotiations, and then also during COVID-19, making determinations who was going to come into work and who wasn't going to come into work. I'm making financial decisions on a regular basis, again with a financial team behind me, to ensure the town will operate effectively and safely for all the citizens as well as the employees in the town. So at the end of the day, I view myself as a strategic thinker, a collaborative leader, and someone who's not afraid to shy away from a challenge or a difficult situation.
Follow? When you talk the COVID-19 employment issues, how did you go about developing that plan for the employees, and what was the strategy that was employed by your department to handle all the myriad of concerns that employees had?
So I work very closely with the town manager. We manage the day-to-day operations. I handle a fair amount of them. I handle a lot of the contract and procurement issues. What we did initially was we gathered all the department heads into a room and brainstormed as to how we would look at reopening before any of the phases were open. And we immediately started looking at what was going to be the biggest challenge for the town. I was tasked with doing a financial analysis project. I worked on that independently. It was an offshoot of one of my projects that I had done in school, but I had tailored it to the town of Chelmsford, and I ran some revenue projections based on the town's current state aid, as well as the state aid that we received after the Great Recession, and what was coming out of the Beacon Hill Institute and Mass Taxpayers Foundation. So we had a two-tier approach as to how we were going to deal with COVID-19, how we were going to deal with the public and reopen the buildings, and then how we were going to deal with the budgetary shortfall. So I was involved in both of those processes, but my job was also to help work with the finance director, accountant, and the manager to craft the budget based on the projections that I shared with them as how we would get through with the shortfall in state aid. During the Great Recession, we had about a 14% cut in state aid, and based on the Beacon Hill Institute and Mass Taxpayer Foundation, they were projecting closer to a 20% cut in state aid. So we planned for a 20% cut in state aid, and we put together a budget that we thought we could work with without laying off employees who were part of the fabric of the community, but the backbone of the town, by level funding the budgets, cutting back in some of our capital expenditures that we could put out for another year or two, and then cutting back on some of our discretionary spending. With regard to the COVID-19, we early on sought out where we could get PPE. I even contacted some of the local dentist offices as well as medical facilities to see if they could donate. We acquired hand sanitizer, static sprayers. So we employed, as I said, the team approach. We tasked various members with critical tasks obtaining those items, and I was part of that team and led the effort on several fronts.
Council Steve?
Could I follow up on that one?
Yeah,
And actually,
follow
my
up on
question
that
was going to be finance anyway, but I wanted to follow up specifically with that area. I took a look at Chelmsford's budget recently, and I noticed that you guys use about $2 million from stabilization. If we were to tap stabilization, what would your priorities be for its use and why?
Okay, when I looked at your budget, I looked at it a couple of different things, and I don't want to, I will eventually circle back to your question, but I noticed the budget, the most recent budget that I saw here from May 20th, your budget is actually up a little bit from last year. I think It's $55 million relative to the 54. What we did was we did not go up. Our budget, when we looked at it in January, was 141 million. What we passed at town meeting was 137 million. I'm a strong believer in a strong stabilization fund because it does one of two things. It helps you with your bond rating, for one, and two, it's there for that rainy day. I know you have a lot of issues here, including roads are a big issue here, and I know you want to focus on that. I do believe that layoffs aren't the first thing that people should look to. That was brought up several times in the town of Chelmsford. You do have costs when you lay people off, but they are people that rely on you and you rely on them. There's that mutually beneficial relationship. So what I would look to do is to make sure that all non-discretionary items such as your insurance, union contracts, pension, other things are funded. Try and do a level funded budget, and then based on the projections of shortfall, fill in the gaps as needed. But you have to make sure you're taking care of your public safety, your roads, and your education. And that's what I would do first and foremost. Capital spending, as I said, is something that if we can forego it, we had some what I would call nice to haves that we postponed. We essentially did a triage of what was on our capital spending list to try and defer that. But at the end of the day, the stabilization is that rainy day fund, and it's raining out there right now. So we chose to use some of that.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And the question I was going to ask specifically is, the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us that local communities need to be more fiscally flexible, as we've just been talking about, and that our long-distance supply chain system may not be reliable enough to meet our needs. Yet we still have the big ticket issues to address, such as providing the basic services, maintaining public infrastructure, handling stormwater. Please give some examples of how you've balanced such fiscal needs with ecological reality and get the citizens to support making the community more resilient for the long term.
I missed one word in there, but I'll do my best. When people pay their taxes, they expect basic services. They want their streets swept, plowed, maintained. They want their children educated, and they want to know when 911 is called that somebody's going to be there. And those are the essential services, and those have to be done bar none. After that, I think you have to address how you can make the community a better place for everyone that's open, diverse, and provide those other services such as your senior center, because even though people think of those first services that I mentioned, that's an essential service that a lot of people rely on. My parents rely on the senior center. A lot of people don't have technology, so they rely on their library.
Right.
We have a community arts center where people go, and recreation. So you can't ignore those even though you have those primary functions. So you have to balance your budget and ensure that you can still touch upon all those other areas, because even though people think of public safety, roads, trash as the essential services, all those other items are still essential services and you can't neglect them. So it's a delicate balance going forward. And I wasn't sure if you mentioned ecological.
I did, yes.
Yes. I was on the committee that brought curbside recycling to the town of Chelmsford. So anything that we can do, I've helped work with our DPW director to bring electric charging stations to the town of Chelmsford. We've relied heavily on solar. I know you have some solar here in Southbridge, but looking at alternative ways to help make the town greener going forward, as well as generating revenue, are something that I've always been open-minded to.
Okay, thank you. And if I can follow up with that one, because one of the questions that I don't think we threw into this pile, was the fact that you may have noticed that we recently closed our landfill.
Yes.
And we are in the process of trying to figure out what we're going to do about curbside recycling and curbside pickup. So could you tell us a little bit more about how you created, what you did, and how you created their program?
Okay, that was some time ago, but we wound up, as I recall, we formed a committee to look at doing the curbside recycling. One of the challenges you're going to face now is that tipping fees are getting so astronomical. What we have done in many of the communities in my area, is that we've worked with other communities to come together on a compact to negotiate our tipping fees with the various haulers and go out to bid. We've been fortunate. There's a part of the RFP process for our last solid waste recycling contract, and we negotiated in some extensions to that contract. So we're going to have a couple of opportunities to extend the contract and lock in those rates. But at the end of that contract, we're going to have some issues. So that is why we are looking to partner with other communities. We currently do that with our gasoline purchase, and I'm a firm believer in buying and being more efficient in economies of scales, and if you can work with other communities to pool together for that purchasing power, then you should.
Thank you very much.
When you said you went out for the RFP process, are you involved in RFPs, creating RFPs yourself?
Yes.
As a project manager, do you do that yourself, or do you have to task it out to hire an engineering firm or procurement processes?
It depends upon the nature of the RFP, but typically I educate myself. I've taken all the courses to become a certified procurement officer in the Commonwealth. I'm the delegated agent for the manager, and I've handled all the major procurements for the town since I became assistant town manager 3.5 years ago. I was working on one this morning for the conservation of historical documents. We relied on another community and the town clerk. She did the bulk of the work, and then I helped her with it to fine-tune it. But I've done procurements for our municipal golf course, our municipal skating rink, for gasoline, for our cable TV. So typically I'll find someone within the town staff that's knowledgeable on it. I'll read up on it myself, and I'll look at the industry standards, and we'll put together an RFP, but I have done the vast majority on my own without outside help.
I just want to ask a follow-up question, if I could. When you talk about cable, you just said cable. Did you have to go out to hire an attorney to negotiate the rates for your town, or are you doing that yourself as well? For a new cable contract, would you try to attempt to do that yourself, or rely on an attorney that specializes in that, or a combination thereof?
It might be a combination. I would have to look at the contract. I was a contracts attorney for a high-tech company before I went into land use as a municipal attorney, but I do negotiate all the union contracts for the town, and I do an awful lot of the contracts associated with the procurement. I worked on telecommunications contracts. I renegotiated our phone system, our software licensing, and some of our IT work as well. So we start in-house, usually with me and the HR director for our collective bargaining, and similarly I've handled all the negotiations for the procurement contracts. Seldom do I call town council for that. It's only been when we wind up, or if we wind up going down to arbitration, and that has happened with one of our union contracts. So.
Thank you. Councilor Daniel.
Thank you, Mike. It's good to see you. Would you like a sip of water before we go on?
Why is my voice getting a little rusty?
No, not at all. It's warm in here, and we're about halfway through.
Council, you might have to bring the mic closer to you because it's hard to hear.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. Like most Massachusetts communities, Southbridge is very dependent upon property taxes as its major source of revenue for services and capital investments, which can put a strain on residential taxpayers. What experience do you have with creative forms of revenue?
Well, I'm not sure that Chelmsford has, other than working on our new growth, we put a huge emphasis on marketing and branding of our 129 to increase new growth. We did not take the option for under question 4 several years ago for marijuana. I noticed that you've recently changed and adopted a bylaw here for marijuana. We did not take that option in Chelmsford. What we have really focused on is economic development and trying to lure folks into the community in terms of the open space that we had on 129. We have spent a fair amount of time working on grants, and a lot of that has been related to economic development. We work closely. We have 4 state representatives in Chelmsford. Our district was cut into fourths about 20 years ago, 15 years ago. And so we have 4 different state representatives that we can try and leverage. We were able to get some Department of Employment and Workforce Development money, which we brought back, and we offered our own business amenity grants to try and lure businesses and restaurants into the community as well as other employers. But in terms of other creative forms of revenue generation, we have tried to refrain from raising taxes on the individuals. We do have some fee-based systems that we use. We try and generate revenue through our golf course and our municipal skating rink, but those are in enterprise funds. But we haven't done anything in terms of raising taxes on the individuals. Recently, our Board of Selectmen chose to go with the split tax rate and push some of that burden more onto the businesses in an effort to alleviate the homeowners' burden.
How do you feel about a split tax rate?
Well, I was a selectman for 9 years. I took a firm position that I did not favor a split tax rate, especially with the amount of open space that we had in the community. I felt that it was detrimental to our efforts to recruit businesses into the community at the same time we were raising their taxes. So as a homeowner, I understood that this is, as my homeowner, not as my assistant town manager voice, but they're part of the community just like we are. A lot of people leave the community during 9 to 5. Those businesses come in 9 to 5 and they help shore up the tax base. They use some of the same services. They use different services, but they also pay the taxes that educate my children and help my parents go to the senior center. So we are a community. We work together, and I felt that we should share the burden together.
Set. I'm going to, you have a follow-up?
Follow up with yes. One of the things that we're considering is a project potentially to put a ballot question on the November ballot for. We're considering putting a ballot question on the November ballot for a fire station, and we were talking about in the hall, out in the parking lot about some of the needs that town buildings have everywhere to get fixed and infrastructure in general. So I'd love to know. Regarding overrides and debt exclusions for big projects, how do you get public buy-in? And if it fails at the ballot, how do you change direction?
I didn't hear that last part.
If it fails at the ballot, how do you change direction?
Well, Chelmsford is an interesting community because it doesn't have a big history of passing overrides. We only had one operational override, I believe it was back in the 1990s for trash collection. We've had some debt exclusions. We have gone, when we looked at renovating our schools, we wound up going back to the voters 3 times until we got a project that was acceptable to the community. We had a similar situation with our library. And when it came to our fire station, we had some issues with the fire station. What we ultimately did was we did it out of the tax base and bonded it. We did not do Proposition 2.5 override. You'd have to look at the budget and see what was coming off in terms of some of your existing debt. So when some of the debt was freed up, we were able to look at funding it within the existing debt structure in the tax base rather than going out and adding additional money onto the tax base. So that was one way that we looked at doing it more creatively.
Yeah, that's what we did with our high school too. So,
All set? Councilor Castrone, I'm going to go to Councilor Dow to follow up on the economic, because we had a conversation on economic. I'll have him do the economic question and the follow-up question as well. So.
Can you please describe your economic development experience with specific example of how you're attracted businesses grown and retention? And will this idea work in Southbridge?
So my wife reminded me that I should have forwarded the council a link. I have been tasked by the town manager in the last couple of years to go speak at an economic development forum that's hosted in Westford by the Westford Businessmen's Association. And if you go, I think, to the Westford Cat News website, you could probably find the most recent talk. And typically what I do when I go out to these forums is I talk about what we've done during my time as an assistant town manager and even some of the initiatives we started when I was still involved in other capacities with the town. We've done a multitude of things. starting from improving our cityscapes and our wayfinding. And I noticed your signs look very similar to Chelmsford. I think you had Mr. Favorman in town to do some of your signs. So when I was a selectman and our manager back then was forward thinking, we did some beautification of the downtown, period lighting, and brick sidewalks. And you might say, how does that play into economic development? Well, I think businesses that want to come in, they look at the downtown, they look at the community, how it takes care of itself, and they want to invest there. What we've done on the other end, and what I've done personally, prior to the town hiring a business development director, I was the name and face of the town for a while. I got the email addresses of all of our contacts for the assessors, and I sent out email blasts, and I went around and met representatives at each of the major companies that were willing to talk to us, to listen, to see what they wanted the town to do. We put an emphasis on bringing businesses into town, working with, as I said, economic development representatives from the state and our state representatives. We attended conferences. We celebrate our local businesses that open. We would have ribbon cuttings, and we would promote them, and we would work with them to invite townspeople as well as town employees when they would first start a restaurant. We also in town really put a lot of emphasis on what we call a live, work, play model. Chelmsford, not unlike Southbridge, is located in close proximity to some major highways. You're very close to 84 and Route 90, and you're not too far from some major urban centers. Given what's going on now with COVID-19 and prior to COVID-19, a lot of people were starting to look at urban living for the transportation, the ability to work. Now some of them are starting to pull back and want to live in less populated areas. But what we created was called a business amenity overlay district. We took areas in our town, much like the manufacturing districts that your manufacturing zones that you have here, and we changed it such that those properties could be zoned to have restaurants, living spaces, as well as businesses inside of them, so that we could take commercial properties, such as some of the mills here, and you could have retail shops on the first floor, you could have some restaurants, you could have recreation in there, and on the top floor you could have living, so that people could move into a facility like that, whether it was designed for elderly living or for workforce housing. You could create that type of environment. Having that adjacent to some of our industrial and business districts became attracted to some of these employers, that they could get their employees, especially millennials, who wanted to live, work, and play right in the same vicinity. And so we put an emphasis on that, and we've since recruited several developers to come in and build housing right around our major industrial parks, which had been substantially vacant until recently. And then we've used some of those business amenity grants that I mentioned earlier to lure some restaurants. It's taken some time, but it's starting to come fruition. If you come down Route 129, you will see there are less vacancy signs. There's more housing. There's soon to be some new restaurants. And some of the larger employers are taking a second look, and some of the smaller employers are coming back into town. So I think there are some similarities to Southbridge as there are in Chelmsford. As I said, geographically, your proximity to the highways, and you have some of the mill buildings around here that could be utilized in that same fashion, that you could employ some similar strategies that might breathe new life into some of the mills that have been vacant.
Thank you. Quick follow-up on that, to kind of flip around what you were just saying. A lot of definitely there's a need to do a lot of the reuse of these old industrial buildings. But one thing that made me think of is what kind of experience do you have in trying to encourage home businesses and people doing things in their own homes as opposed to the more industrial type facilities? And how do you balance that with the other kinds of businesses?
We've been very receptive to a lot of the smaller businesses in town. I don't know that we've reached out to any home-operated businesses. I don't think we do anything to discourage them. But as I said, whether it's someone, we had DCU come in the other year and we did a ribbon cutting and a big celebration, or someone who opens a craft store, which we had someone in the downtown last year, they get the same treatment in terms of the same number of town employees will come down. We do a ribbon cutting with them because we treat everybody the same. And that's my philosophy as an administrative official is, they expect the same treatment, whether it's a 2-person operation or a 20,000 person operation. And so I would be welcoming and I would want to leverage my town's website. We have an economic development website up there that features our branded Crossroads 129. You could easily tailor that to put up information and direct folks that are looking to start home businesses that way and encourage them and provide resources from Southbridge or Chelmsford or whatever community you want right there.
Okay. And what about agriculture? Does Chelmsford have much of that? And how do you work with that? Because I know that there's a few people in town, and I know our agricultural commission is looking at trying to do a right to farm bylaw. So that there's a few people in town that are trying to make a living at agriculture if possible, or at least for themselves anyway. So
we don't have much agriculture left in town. The biggest thing we see right now is trying to hold on to 61A land, and we're trying to purchase some of it. Unfortunately, the town of Chelmsford, like many communities in New England, it's changing. Right. When I was a young man, I worked on one of the last dairy farms in our community, and I worked on one of the last poultry farms, and I can drive by and show my kids treed lots that used to be open fields. Yeah. But the town has some town-owned land. We're adjacent to the Merrimack River, and we have some land adjacent to the river that's open space. And we have leased some of that to some people that want to start farming. So if Southbridge had some suitable property and you wanted to encourage agriculture, perhaps you could work with them. We have a section of town off of our bike trail called Sunny Acre Farms, or Sunny Meadows, I'm sorry. But we do work in conjunction with several of the farmers that want to lease space. We have some greenhouses, and we have community gardens as well. And that way we can bring in not just people who want to make a commercial go at it, but residents who wish to try farming for the first time, and they can rent a plot at various sizes for the summer, and they can participate in farming that way too.
Thank you.
Councilor Catrone, did you have a follow-up question to this, or?
No.
No, I thought. Anything else? I think he answered part of it, but go ahead, and if you want to ask that. If he has anything to respond.
The primary focus of economic development, is this downtown revitalization and bringing in new businesses to the town industry park? Do you have any specific experience with projects similar to this? How will you tackle this project? How will you address the challenge of limited highway access?
So Chelmsford's an interesting community, and I can compare a little bit to Southbridge. We have two distinct centers of town. North Chelmsford tried to secede one time from Chelmsford over 100 years ago, or approximately 100 years ago. South Chelmsford was an agricultural community, and North Chelmsford was very similar in ways to Southbridge. It was a mill section of the community. We have the housing and architecture is very different. So I've been involved in the improvements in both sections of town. We've worked on trying to get MassWorks grants to make improvements in our lighting. We've also worked on facade programs. We happen to have utilized the Community Preservation Act in our community. We leveraged some of those monies to try and help revitalize the storefronts in the downtown in the Vinyl Square area. But we've worked on beautification in both. We have strategic action plans or master plans for both sections of the community, as well as an overall master plan that we work to make sure that we're bolstering all areas of the community so that there's a look and feel, and you keep that charm and the integrity of the town while also preparing for the future. Many years ago, we tried to put all of our wires underground. We're still working towards that so that the town would be more downtown friendly. I chair what is called our Traffic and Safety Committee. We do have the town adjacent to the highways. It's a challenge being close to it, and it's a challenge being away from the town. But I think you can still lure folks in here, especially the ones that want to get out of their urban areas. The problem that you still have in a community like Chelmsford or even here in Southbridge is cut-through traffic. I saw a lot of people coming through on 31 and off of 84, coming through Sturbridge to get to and from the highway. It's an issue that we have to deal with. We have a lot of commercial trucking. I've worked on projects with Mass DOT to try and get heavy commercial vehicle exclusions and create preferred truck routes so as not to burden the townspeople with traffic. But we do our best to lure people in off the highway, but we also try and manage the traffic coming through. And I hope I answered your question. If not, just let me know.
Council Adams, you have a follow-up?
I do, thank you, Mr. Chair. Right now, we have a redevelopment authority in town. It hasn't been used to its capacity. What would you recommend at this point with utilizing CDBG funds, Chapter 90 money, our own town taxes, to help out the redevelopment authority to get off the ground? Because they are an asset, I believe, to our community.
Some of the biggest assets that I see in the community are the Southbridge Innovation Center, as well as the properties around it. Having a welcoming entrance to the town, there's a rotary down there. You could have some nice signage out there, but having a user-friendly traffic flow through the community that brings them in, utilizing any MassWorks grants, having proper signalization, but having that welcoming entrance to the community. That was the problem that we had in Chelmsford at 129. Nobody realized that they were crossing into Chelmsford. We wanted them to know that they were coming in. We wanted to know that this was our technological center. This was our business and commercial district. So we put an emphasis on that branding, and we eventually will have signage out there. So in terms of redevelopment, it's promoting the town. It's making it business friendly as well as taxpayer friendly, and keeping, when I say taxpayer friendly, trying not to raise taxes to do it and leverage the various grants that are there and the funds that are there in an effort to recruit business, really, because I think new growth is key for most communities, especially communities like Chelmsford and Southbridge.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you.
Councilman McCall?
Good evening. I just have a follow-up on economic development. The problem here in Southbridge that many town officials seem to think is that we don't have proper access to the highways, to the marketplace. I personally think we do have access to the marketplace. It's just that our roads are not in good shape to get the trucks in for manufacturing. And the other problem is, I'm not sure we have a properly trained workforce, and I personally think that we should have some sort of training for workers, whether it be a technical school. I know we have Bay Path in Charlton, but Bay Path isn't enough for all the residents in Southbridge to get proper training. So what ideas would you have for better access to the highway and better training for the workforce in Southbridge?
I haven't spent enough time in recent years in Southbridge. I used to work in Charlton when I was a young man, so I have been in the area in the past, and I will say that I did cut through Southbridge, and I did go to Drescher Hill on my first date many years ago, but that was a ways back. So I couldn't tell you exactly where I would put an emphasis on truck routes, but I think if there was a concern about trucks getting access from the highway, you would utilize your numbered routes, obviously, but if you could then direct them around from some of the more densely populated neighborhoods, that would make it more convenient. Potholes and road improvement is going to be a challenge in every community. As you may have seen, the legislature was looking at $300 million for Chapter 90 money. It went down to $200 million. What we've done in recent years is we have dedicated some of the money that we put in our snow and ice budget at the end of the year that's unused for our for our potholes and road repair. This year's a little bit different. We're going to use some of that money for COVID-19, but hopefully when everything returns to normal, what I would do is start looking at areas in the budget that you could channel some of those monies back into road repair, especially where that's a primary concern here. the last couple of years have afforded us that opportunity because we've had relatively mild winters. So we've been taking that, and rather just putting it right into the general fund or the stabilization fund, we've given it right back, because that not only helps the businesses and the people that want to use the roads for commercial, but that's a direct payback to the citizens that are looking for those potholes to be fixed on their streets.
And what about technical training for the workforce?
We haven't done anything specifically, but I've always made a good relationship with our state reps, people at Mass Development, and I have some colleagues that work at the workforce and employment and workforce development. I would say that as a town manager, I would reach out to those agencies and my legislative representatives to see what the state could provide in terms of training for the residents here and anybody looking to come to work in Southbridge. We have a technical high school in the neighboring community in Westford, and we have the largest number of pupils that go into the town. We're very, into the technical high school. We're very supportive of that, and as the assistant town manager, I leverage a lot of the projects that we have by utilizing the students over there. So we have a good working relationship. It allows their students to learn the needs of the community. I let them work on some of our vehicles when possible. We've had them do some minor building projects, and whenever I think of it, I want to get them involved so that they can learn the skills, but also learn about our community and hopefully get employed there when they graduate.
All right, thank you.
Bob, Steve?
Yes. We're in a similar situation because we have our Voc Tech High School is in Charlton as well. And we also have a two-year Quinsigamond Community College here. In the past, we've had talk about trying to get a four-year college in town. I would love to get some ideas of how you might be able to help us do that. I mean, granted that there's not so many colleges out there. With the COVID-19, some of the colleges are suffering right now. But how would you go about helping us do something like that?
I happen to have several friends who are in higher education who have worked at very senior positions at various colleges. Right away, I would reach out to professionals in the community to talk to them about it. I'm not sure if having a brick and mortar college at this date and time is probably the best path to go. That would just be my gut reaction. But you have, and when I say that, I mean building a brand new one.
Yeah,
I think you have plenty of space and beautiful buildings, including, as I said, this. I think this is a Romanesque architecture style buildings right here in the community that could be leveraged. But I think there's an emphasis on distance learning. Perhaps you could lure someone to come in and start a college here, work out of that space, and grow. But I think a lot of people right now, given the concerns of COVID, are going to look at distance learning and that ability to work part-time. But what it may serve as is a great place to lure workforce into the town if they think they can come here, work during the day, take their class at night and go home, or better yet, work here in the day, take their class at night and go home here. So again, to go back, I would reach out to, again, professionals in that area, people that I know and worked with in the past, as well as probably guidance from some of the folks at the schools around here, Springfield College, there's Clark, people I know at all these communities and in those colleges, and get some ideas, and work with, obviously, the council.
Thank you. Councilor Catrone?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, Michael. Thank you for interviewing here this evening.
Thank you.
Let's talk a little bit about project management. Please tell us about any significant municipal projects you have managed in your past roles. Also, how do you manage the organization and yourself to stay on top of the myriad issues and projects and make sure that things get accomplished?
Okay. Some of the larger projects that I've worked on recently was converting our entire phone system in the town of Chelmsford. And that started because the accounting clerk came up one day and said, I don't understand why we're paying this amount of money on a telephone bill. And so just my own nature and take charge, I started asking some questions of our IT folks and found out that we were paying additional charges for every direct dial line that we had in the town, and we had hundreds of them. I then started researching it and tasked the IT department to look into it, what our options were. We then looked at the price to replace the existing phone contract, which was up. We did some solicitations for quotes, and we looked at a variety of different technologies. And we actually found out by using a cloud-based phone system that we could save the town tens of thousands of dollars. So I did the procurement for that, negotiated the contract for that, and then I worked with the department heads in our IT, we have in-house IT in Chelmsford, and worked with them, managed the various milestones I utilize my phone, I utilize Outlook, but I stayed on top of the department by department cutover, and then followed up with the new carrier and the old carrier to terminate the contracts and the services, as well as to get refunds, and oversaw the employees in the different departments to return all the existing equipment to ensure we got our money back. So at a high level, I'm watching all the milestones. I check in with those people, even some of them that aren't under my direct sphere of control, but to ensure that the project is flowing, I will go in and talk to them just to make sure and remind them things have to get done. So I hope that answers that. I did a similar project with converting all of our licensing software. When I came in, I found out that the town had purchased licensing software for building permits, dog licenses and things, and it wasn't adopted by all departments when it was first installed. And so we were paying for that contract, and then individual departments went out and purchased their own licensing software they liked. So there was no homogeneous platform there. So I brought all the department heads into a room. We interviewed 3 or 4 different software companies that were on the state bid list, and then we picked the one that we liked the most, and then we started a rollout plan, and we're in the middle of doing that. We're going department by department to roll that out, and I check in routinely with the department heads in the IT as well as the developer of the product to make sure that it's going smoothly.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up, if I could,
Yeah, absolutely.
Mr. Chair. In Southbridge, the town is about to seek funding for a large capital project, fire station. Trying to gather my thoughts. Can you describe your approach to working with the council to fund a project?
So I think in that instance, it would really be to get a sense of where, as the councilors, you're in the community, much like the selectmen were, but it's not like the 162 reps that we would go to for funding at a town meeting. So I would have to gauge and build a relationship with each one of you to understand what essentially your risk tolerance and what your sense of the community is in terms of what the community can afford and what we need. And you have to balance those in any project. I mean, you can't build a building that won't serve your needs for the next 25 or 50 years. But you also have to realize that you're going to your citizens to get that money. So you would be the eyes and ears on the ground, and as I said, we have that relationship and communication. You would be telling me, this is what my constituents say we can't do, and we would have to come together and partner on what the project would look like, what it's going to cost. And then my role as the assistant and what I've seen of the managers in my communities that I've worked for is I would then help, if not be the salesperson for that, but help the council in pitching it to the community and ensure that it's something that they want. We work a little bit differently, as I said, with town meeting. We get up and we have to convince those 162 reps that this is in the best interest of the community. So we've gone up and we've done presentations, and we're playing to a different audience. So here it's a much more intimate relationship, so it's going to be built on that communication and trust that I talked about earlier.
Thank you.
And just a quick follow-up. When you talk about project management itself, we've had several projects that, for the benefit of the town, but oversight, how would you oversee those projects? So, i.e., merge of a dispatch center that was proposed, and how would you make sure that those timelines are met so that you're within the proposal, or even develop the project so you have this great idea, but then it becomes a mishmash of cost and then coming back to council for more money and all that. How would you envision going forward with a project of that magnitude to make sure that it's, that you would manage it, or how would you propose to manage it, and your oversight of that project to make sure that it is done in a timely manner and done within the budget? How would you go about developing that process with your department heads and the council?
So, again, referring to my resume, when I was a district court prosecutor, I handled thousands of cases throughout my career, sometimes thousands of cases within a year. I had one admin and I worked with the court clerk, and my job, I've always envisioned it, I learned it from my father and my grandfather, it's been 24/7. I think of these things at night. If I were to pull out my cell phone right now, you would find emails called to do that come at 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning. I keep track of deadlines through my calendars, but whenever I get an idea, I email myself, I text myself. And so I don't wait on it. When something happens, it has to be done, and you do it right then and there, and you ensure, you mark those deadlines. If there's a council meeting and you give me a task, the first thing I'm doing when I leave that meeting is I'm going to go put those in my calendar. Those are how things get forgotten, and you track those. I've made my living in project management as well as when I was a prosecutor, ensuring that if you're going to go to trial, you have to plan that months in advance. Very similar with the procurement. When I open a bid or when I publish a bid, there's a timeline that you have to work in reverse. So I pretty much start with what I perceive as the end date or the primary objective, and then I start working back to build my milestones to know where I have to be in order to have that come to fruition at the date and time I want it. Yes, you can plan in contingencies, but you have to be able to envision the end line, the goal line before you start. And if you don't have that, you don't have that ability to remind yourself and to utilize the tools that will remind yourself, you're destined to fail. And throughout my career, I've delivered a lot of projects, and I've tried hundreds of cases, and I never had a situation where I got to court and I didn't have a witness. I didn't deliver a piece of software where I didn't have a piece of software that was needed. Occasionally you're going to have mistakes, and you can work with it. You build in some contingencies, but it's not something that I like to have happen, so I plan accordingly, and I start by building it backwards and relying on tools and making sure that I don't miss them. And that's why I wake up a lot of times in the middle of the night and I text myself and say, you got to call so-and-so in the morning to check on that.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Marquetti?
Good evening, Attorney McCall. I took a look at your resume. I thought it was very impressive, very incredible background and experience that you have. I thought your references were glowing. I don't think there was a negative word said about you in all the references that were spoken. You're currently the assistant manager in Chelmsford. It sounded to me like Chelmsford is in love with you and probably would like you to stay. But anyways, my question tonight, we were handed questions to ask you, and my question is as follows. Southbridge is a community with much diversity, which includes a significant Latino population. What is your experience in working with these populations, and how would you work to engage citizens in the issues of town government and to help build a stronger sense of connection and community?
Okay, thank you. As I indicated before, my work history has taken me a lot of different places. I had to learn German when I moved overseas. I actually chose to learn German so I could work better with my colleagues there. It's kind of a quirk, but I've always enjoyed languages. I studied French and Spanish simultaneously throughout secondary school and took Spanish in through college. I've worked in several industries over the years where I had people from different cultures, from all over Europe, different continents, especially in the high-tech world. And I've been able to build upon my language skills, specifically Spanish, in recent years. I was actually on an exchange with Suffolk University in March to learn from the Puerto Rican government about how they were dealing with their financial crisis. And we were there to also help some of the people in the Ponce area with regard to the earthquakes. I could probably tell you this story in Spanish if you wanted, because my Spanish has gotten better. I conducted most of my interviews for my project with the gig workers in Spanish, and it's come in handy. And how I would approach the diversity, again, as I said, you treat everybody with compassion and respect, regardless of whether they are the most wealthy person in the community or they're the person just starting out. And that goes for language and culture. I have had the opportunity to work, again, with people who barely speak English, don't speak English, and I've learned a lot from those folks. I actually was called out to a site one day by one of the local police departments because they had had a child abduction and the grandmother didn't speak any English, and it was very gratifying to help her to get a description of the car, and I didn't understand the term guagua at the time, which is a minibus. I always learned autobus in proper Spanish class, but together we got through it. What I had suggested to the screening committee was that when you look around at what's going on in the country right now, I think people want to be heard. People want to feel a part of the community, and there are ways that you can do that. We have some festivals in our community, and I thought it would be in the best interest of a town like Southbridge maybe to put on a cultural heritage day and allow various residents to come in and maybe in your downtown area, let the restaurants, you close off one of the streets. That's what we do at our Winterfest. We allow the restaurants to come out. I also talked about whether you could create a sister or friendship city where if you have a heavy contingent of people from one particular area geographically, maybe you adopt a city in one of those communities and you start a cultural exchange. I think there are many ways to recognize the diversity and to celebrate the diversity, and then you reach out to stakeholders in those communities and encourage them to get involved in the community, and a lot of that happens one-on-ones. And as I said, as the manager, I often go out to meet the various business owners in our town, and I do the ribbon cuttings, and I like to go around and visit the other locales in our town occasionally when, at lunchtime. So you would introduce yourself, you'd welcome in, you encourage them to get involved, and maybe you need to have a committee that talks about cultural diversity. We just started in our town, we had a cultural diversity listening session in light of everything that's been going on. We held it last week. And that was a suggestion that was made by some of the young kids in town, that maybe the town has to, have a group of citizens made up of diverse backgrounds to talk about how we can improve ways to build relationships, how we can shape school curriculum, how we can change the diversity of our workforce. So, it starts with the conversation. So it's all about communication.
Thank you.
Council Love?
A follow-up question on the citizen relations, working to engage citizens, help build a stronger sense of connection to the community. The question a lot of citizens ask during this process that's moving forward is, and I'm just going to ask the question, do you plan on moving to Southbridge if you become the Southbridge Town Manager?
So I can foresee myself moving. You might say, yes, you didn't answer it directly. I have one child who's a senior in high school. When I had the conversation about applying for this job with my family, I envisioned that I would most likely, if selected, if I was fortunate to be selected, I would look to relocate here and drive back on the weekends to ensure I was spending time with my high school senior. And that's the answer I would give you, at least for the first year. And then after he's out of high school, if he chooses to go off to college, I would revisit spending full time here. And that's all I can commit to today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Council Ryan?
Thank you. The Southbridge Public Schools are currently under the jurisdiction of a state-appointed receiver. What do you see as the town manager's role in working with the receiver in the school department? And what type of relationship have you developed with state government and other stakeholders that would be beneficial to the town?
So the relationship that I've had in my community is a good working relationship with not only the superintendent of our public schools, but also of the vocational school. I have the type of relationship where I can pick up the phone at any time and call either one of them, and I have the local school superintendent's cell phone number and my, favorites, so to speak. Probably not my intimate favorites like my family, but he's up there with people I call on a regular basis. always been supportive of education. My children have been educated in the town that we came in, and public schools are where everybody has an opportunity to go and learn, and that's where people put their tax dollars in a community so they can get their kids educated. So it is an important component of the community to have the support of the manager as well as the elected officials on both sides, in my opinion. Typically, the school committee oversees all the school functions, but when you come out for your budget, they put together their budget, but you are presenting it to the community, and it has to be something that you can all get behind. The relationship that I have had with state and elected officials has been one very early. I cultivated working with state representatives and our state senators in the area. I've had colleagues over the years that have employed at various state agencies, and I've had the ability to work with the lieutenant governor on a project when we received some, I can't think of the name of the grant, but I worked on a grant project with the lieutenant governor, and I co-hosted an event when she came out to the community. But I have no problem going down to the State House. It's a little further for you folks, but over the years I've gone down to lobby firsthand. I can call at least one of my state reps. I have his cell phone number. I'm currently working on a project right now with Mass DOT. We're trying to build an alternative road to route truck traffic away from one of our residential neighborhoods. So I put a lot of stock in those relationships. Again, it all comes back to communication and a conversation and knowing when to utilize that relationship. If you can't call your state rep or the lieutenant governor every day of the week, you need to know when the right time is to leverage that relationship and when it's in the best interest of your community.
If I may follow up, Mr. Chairman. I really do want to delve a little deeper into the receivership question, because we're in a unique situation. We don't have a normal superintendent. The school committee, in particular, feels very powerless. I was a former member of the school committee, former chair, and a lot of us felt disenfranchised from the process. We weren't brought to the table a lot of the times, and we were excluded from a lot of things. So I really want to know what you're going to do to empower the school committee, even though it has no power, to be involved, and what you're going to do to help to work closely with the receiver, since they have the powers of the superintendent and school committee. I know it's a very loaded question.
Yeah, I have had really no experience with a receivership in our community, but all I can tell you is based on what you've seen in my resume and my other answers. I have always been a person who rises to a challenge. I'm not a person that would shy away from it. I would utilize all of my resources and skills to do what's in the best interest of the community, in the best interest of the parents that want their children educated. And my plan would be coming on board to come up as quickly to speed on every one of the issues here. My background has not dealt that much with school other than the answers that I provided earlier, working with our vocational school district and working on technology with our school. But I would endeavor to represent the town and ensure that the town is getting the best bang for their buck, as well as ensuring that the best education that we can afford for the community.
So, if I could follow up on that, because I think receivership is a big issue when it comes to schools, and I really am interested in the relationship. And granted, and I certainly respect your answer, because nobody really is familiar with receivership at all. So I'm not going to hold that against you, because it's a difficult thing. I think what I'm looking for, and perhaps Councilor Ryan, I don't want to speak for her, but I want to know, as manager, do you take that on as not just, hey, the state's running the school, there's nothing we can do about it, or do you feel that the town and you as town manager should have that equal seat at the table to say, hey, how as a town and a community, how would you develop that relationship that as a community, town manager and receivership? And you talked earlier about project manager with an end date in sight.
Yes.
How would you work with that receiver to say, hey, how do we get to that end date to come out of receivership? So, because we all know that good schools are one of the factors that bring economic development to your town. So, and I know that's a lot of information, but it just made me some thought that you might have on that.
at the end of the day, Southbridge is the biggest stakeholder in that and should have a seat at the table with the receiver, and it shouldn't be dictated, in my opinion, anytime the state comes in to help out. I mean, you have to have some say in what's going on, and if there is a will, there is a way. I would ensure that as the manager, I would be there representing the community and making sure their voice is heard in the process. I try and do that with the issues that we have now. Sometimes it doesn't always go the way we want. I'm going at it with Mass DOT on a couple of projects, but they have the final say sometimes, but I want to make sure that the town's voice is heard on the projects that are important to my town now. I would do the same thing here.
If I may ask one more follow-up. How would you interact with other communities in the region?
So right now, we have a good working relationship, or I would say I have a good working relationship with the towns around us. I talk to my peers in the neighboring communities on a fairly regular basis. We share ideas. I go every year to the Mass Municipal Association annual conference and network. But during the COVID-19 crisis, we immediately got together. We're in the Merrimack Valley. We contacted neighboring managers and their assistant managers, and we had a weekly call, and we shared ideas. As it turned out, Chelmsford was actually a little bit ahead of everybody in terms of getting our plexiglass, our PPE. But we shared ideas how we were going to deal. Some of us have public beaches. We have lakes with beaches. How we were going to handle the reopening of those. How we were going to reopen our bike path, other things. So it's important to have those relationships, as I said before, for the exchange of ideas, if there's problems coming up, because you're going to have opportunities at different times, as I said, for mutual compacts to enable yourself to get better purchasing power. So you want to have a relationship where you can call and say, I've got a problem, or hey, let's look at this together and see how we can benefit for it. So I've always maintained those relationships in the town that I'm in now, including in the towns that I was in New Hampshire, so I would do that if I was here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Well, that went by quick. I wish we had more time, because I'm sure we could go around the room a lot more for questions. Councilor
Yeah, just a quick one on the receivership. I'm a gentleman that's served on school committee past years. I've served on council before, and this is my second tour. The receivership is very frustrating, as I'm not sure the state has the actual answer to how to dismount from what they've jumped into. But what's happened is the council has fully financed the budgets, and the only say basically that the town has is bottom line on the school budget. Mm-hmm. We cannot get into the budget. The salary lines that have been created for administration and the system, to me, are not sustainable if we take them back over. So there'll be a bump in the financing on how we handle it if it does happen. My question to you as the town manager, and you're going to have a heavy role and a heavy voice in this, this is a pretty unified council. In some issues, we differ, but we always go back to work. And on this one, the tough thing is that we really can't get our hands around how to take our district back to the community and show the state that we can do that. As the town manager and a leader, how would you work with the state? I mean, working together is fine. I think Councilor Jovian has worked hand in hand with the receiver, meetings all the time, but it seems like we're like a petri dish and we're an experiment, and no matter what we keep trying to do, and I'm not pointing the finger at anybody, it seems like we deteriorate and the revolving door in the system continues in a lack of stability. What would you do, or how would you attack that or deal with it?
The way we deal with the budget in our town, we have pretty much a set proportion that is for the town side and the school side. It sounds to me like you're saying that they have created some unsustainable spending issues on that side. And at the end of the day, the manager has to present a budget that can be passed by this board that is going to provide the services that you need. You would have to, when control is given back over to the superintendent, you're going to have a realistic sit down with that individual, he or she, and say, listen, we can't afford this. There could be places, there are, they're going to escape me at the moment, but different accounts that may provide some short-term relief within the school budget. There, from time to time, when we look at the budget, even within our own community, the schools will continue to ask for money, for only us to find that there is money in certain accounts, and I don't want to get into the specifics, but I think if the school could be told, listen, we can afford X, you're going to have to work within that budget, that we're going to have to work with them to come back to that line.
Good answer.
Thank you. Okay. So, in closing, is there anything else you may not have had an opportunity through the question to give us in a couple minutes, or do you have any questions of us counselors?
I'm not sure that I have any questions. I'm hoping that I've answered all of your questions, and if there's anything that you don't think that I've addressed, I would just ask that you let me know so that I can answer it before we go. If there's any questions you have about any of the skills that I have or haven't mentioned.
Councilor Dan?
Yes, I'm intrigued about your sister city comment.
Yes.
And with welcoming in the Latino population in town. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
I did look, I mentioned that during the screening committee, and I did look, there is an organization called Sister Cities, and they can help you partner up with a city in another country that has ties to your geographical region here. My thought was, depending upon the breakdown of the folks here in Southbridge, there might be a significant population from a particular country that you might want to look into, creating a sister city in that country. Sister cities, my understanding, you do 3 exchanges a year. If you have a friendship relationship, you do 1 exchange. But that might mean somebody from the council goes and visits that city, and somebody from that city comes here. And then you can leverage on that visit to build around one of those cultural events that I had suggested before. So if you're having a cultural heritage event or a week, and you close off the streets and you turn it into a street fest, and you're celebrating your local restaurants as well as the culture and the food from the various communities, that would be the time to do the exchange, and to highlight, just as things were done years ago to celebrate my grandparents or immigrants. We have different days. You can see them on the calendar that we maybe wear different colors or eat different foods to acknowledge the different immigrant waves that came in years past. I don't see why we can't do that for the new waves of immigrants that come through now.
Very good. Councilor McCall?
Well, as long as you asked what other questions we might have, I'm curious. As I said, you had glowing references in Chelmsford. It seems like they really like you there. You're assistant manager in Chelmsford. The Chelmsford Town Manager is not staying for, after this year, he's all done. He's stated it publicly. It seems to me you would be next in line for the job in Chelmsford. So I guess, why do you want to come to Southbridge is my question.
I wanted 2 things. One, I think the political landscape has changed. We've had a turnover in the board. We have 4 new people who I think share diverging political interests and municipal interests than I do. But 2, I want to go to a community and make my own mark. Anything that I do in Chelmsford will probably come from the legacy of the 2 preceding managers who I had worked with as a citizen, as an elected official, and they put their name on the community. Whatever I do in Chelmsford, people might say, well, you just inherited that from the predecessors. Anything that I do here in Southbridge is going to be as a result of the work that I do. And one of the reasons I thought this was a good time is because of the fact that there are challenges in our economy, there's challenges because of COVID-19, and I'm not afraid of the challenges, and I think it's a good time to get out to make your mark, because I've always learned the most from any situation when the times were tough, because you have to make the tough decisions, and you learn right away if you're making the right decision or not. So I realized this is a time for me to chart my own course, to find a community that's willing to take a chance with me, because I set high expectations for myself, and I'm sure that I can come on and work with your staff, build those relationships, work effectively and efficiently, and that I won't disappoint you. So that's why I put my name in for Southbridge.
All right, fair enough.
Thank you. Councilor Lazo, go
Just a
ahead.
quick comment. Mr. McCall, you hit 5 points of light during your talk tonight. Taxpayer-friendly, open-door policy, communication, team concept, accountability, and oversight. If there are 5 things that a town manager needs, that's them, and you spoke about it tonight. It was absolutely impressive. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McCall, for being here tonight. It was certainly a great wealth of information. I can see why the search committee put your name forward to come forward, because I can understand you're trying to make a mark, and all the work that you've done, and quite impressive, and we look forward to our discussion Thursday night. We'll be meeting Thursday night to discuss this interview process, because as you know, Board of Selectmen, I'm sure, having gone through searches yourself, to interview in a night and then try to make a decision, your mind is just spinning by the end. So we want to make sure we make a fair, well thought out decision. So we will be meeting Thursday night at 6:30 to discuss all the interviews that took place tonight, and it is on the agenda. If we make a decision that evening, we will certainly let you know. But thank you very much for being here. We wish you the best of luck,
Thank you.
and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members of the council, for inviting me here, and I wish you all a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll stand in recess for, we'll reconvene 6:30, all right? 6:30. 6:30.